Hi, good morning everybody. Just to start off just by saying that obviously we're in an acupuncture conference, so why would we be talking about the adrenals? Because it's not really part of Chinese medicine, but obviously the adrenals do exist. So we have to try to incorporate them into what we're doing and trying to bring some understanding. You know, it's a bit like the pancreas. What do we do about the pancreas? Do we call it a spleen pancreas? Is it really a spleen? Is it a blood sugar? You know, it's a whole different thing. So the adrenals are part of that kind of, what do we do with it kind of thing. So what I'm going to do today is just give you some of the sort of a little bit of the background of the Western theory of the adrenals, and then we're going to talk obviously about the Chinese. That's the first part this morning. And then the second part of the morning, we're going to go through a specific adrenal protocol, which hopefully you can take away. It's on your sheets. You can use it tomorrow morning in clinic. And I'm going to show you a very simple way to diagnose the adrenals on the body, and then you'll be able to take it away and use the points that are on your sheets already. Okay, so that's the plan for the morning. So yeah, I hope you enjoy it. So as I say, it's important to understand that the adrenals are part of the kidneys, and the question is how much of the kidneys are they part of? Okay, so one of the very common Western ways of understanding the adrenals and the stress response, some of you will no doubt be familiar with this. It was a Hungarian physician who way back, this book about the general adaptation syndrome, which is called The Stress of Life, came out I think 1953 or 1956. But even so, that's, you know, quite, well, not by our standards, it's not ancient, but anyway, it's quite, you know, relatively long time ago. This theory is still drawn on by many different people. Okay, so I present it today just so you get some understanding, which I'm sure you probably all know already clinically, this kind of goes on, but it's good to kind of have a little bit of perhaps more detail on what's actually happening. So with this theory, he suggests there's kind of three phases to it. There's the initial phase, which is the phase where the stress arrives. It doesn't necessarily have to be mental, emotional. It can be a very large amount of physical stress. So we're programmed through evolution to give some response to that. And that's a normal response. It's a normal adrenaline response. Okay, so we get stressed for whatever reason, physical, mental, emotional, etc. And we go into this initial kind of what he called the alarm phase. The kind of, whoa, things are going on. We've got to do something about that. Okay? Then, that's fine. And this blue line here is that kind of response. So there may be a bigger alarm phase, there may be smaller alarm phases, but in any event, after the alarm is over, your adrenal response returns to normal. Okay, so that's the kind of a normal response, normal healthy response. That's why we've got adrenals to fight or flight and all of that kind of thing. Okay, however, if, for example, there's this stress goes on for a prolonged amount of time, you know, there's a work situation that's going on and on and on and on and on, or you're physically working extremely hard for whatever reason, you're redoing your house, the stress is going on and on and on, then your body has to go into a resistance, what he called a resistance phase. Okay, so you've kind of gone from the alarm into the resistance. And what's important about this kind of section here is that obviously, as you can see from my diagram, which is based on his idea, that level doesn't return to normal again. It kind of stays at an elevated level. Okay, and obviously, like any system of the body, if it stays at an elevated level for too long, then sooner or later, that is going to go to its opposite. Okay, so you're going to get into an exhaustion phase. Okay, so it seems very obvious, but he was the first guy that really kind of put this on the map, as it were, and suggested it. So you've got this initial alarm phase, which is a normal thing. However, it can go quite easily into a resistance phase. And that resistance phase will obviously last a different amount of time for different people. Okay, some people are much more resilient, so the stress won't, you know, one person's stress is another person's so what? You know, I don't care, it doesn't bother me. So this phase will depend on the resilience and the adaptivity of the person himself or herself, and the amount of time that these stresses are going on. You know, is it just like a few incidents at work and then it all calms down? Is your relationship just a bit rocky, then it all sorts itself out? Have you finished the house? All that kind of stuff. Once you've gone through that stage, then your levels should return to normal. However, if for whatever reason your strength isn't that great, or the stress goes on for too long, as I say, then it comes into this exhaustion phase. Okay, so most of the time clinically, you're going to see people here, but very often they'll be down in this exhaustion phase. And of course, you'll all hear, I don't know how long you've been in practice, but you will hear over the years many times they've gone and they're adrenal burnout for whatever reason. Or they just say, I'm burnt out. If they've been medically somewhere or they've had some kind of blood test, they may say, oh, I'm burnt out, my adrenals are burnt out. But many people will just be in this exhaustion phase all on their own kind of thing, without any particular diagnosis. But they will come in, they're exhausted, they don't recover well from illness, or an illness goes on for a long time, etc., etc. And we'll see some of that, those more details, when we get to the etiology later on and the signs and symptoms. Okay, so those are the sort of three phases. And interestingly, he was a medical doctor, and what he found out was that actually what happens in the end, if it goes too far, is that because there's two parts to the adrenal glands, which we're going to see in a moment. Those of you who's taking pictures, I think it should be on your handouts. Yeah, I mean, just to let you know, you're fine to take a picture, but anyway. Where was I? Yeah, he found, because there's two parts to the adrenal glands, there's the adrenaline part, which comes from the medulla, and then there's the cortex part, which we're going to come to in a moment, which is outside, and they do different things. But basically, if the cortex secretes too much cortisol for too long, initially it's anti-inflammatory, but if that goes on for too long, it suppresses the immune function. And the animals that he experimented on, obviously it was a long time ago, so anyway, he experimented on, actually the thymus gland, which is vital for your immunity, actually reduced in size. And that was its function was suppressed, and also the lymph node function was suppressed. So if you see people in this phase or this phase, it's going to be kind of systemic, because the adrenals aren't just about adrenaline, there's other things going on as well. And as you'll see from your sheets as well, there's also medically, they've discovered that there's, as well as the impaired immune function, there's chronic hypertension, obesity, and problems with your arteries. Okay? So there's lots of reasons why elevated adrenal levels are not good for you. Okay? In addition, from clinical observation, it's very easy to see that as the adrenals are part of, well, the medulla is part of the sympathetic part of the autonomic nervous system. If the sympathetic part is elevated, the parasympathetic is automatically depressed. Okay, you can't have both running at the same time. So your sympathetic is kind of dominant, because that's your fight or flight one, which gives you, right, okay, there's a rhinoceros coming, well, I've got to run away, okay. You don't want to be digesting food at that time, so all your blood goes to your muscles and you're ready for action. But if that goes along chronically, then you will often get things like impaired digestive function and poor ability to recover from illness, which I've just mentioned, and just increased anxiety. Okay, so it's very important that when we see people with, wrong way, in this phase or in this phase, it's very important to treat the adrenals. Okay, and as I say, we're going to give you a way to do that. By the way, if you've got any questions as I'm rolling along, please stick a paw in the air, yeah, we'll try to answer them. Okay. So the other thing to say, obviously, about this I've just mentioned, is extremely common. You know, I mean, if you're under 21, your Jing is probably still good. Okay. If you're over 21, 28, or for men 28, no, hang on, women 7. 14, yeah, 28 men, hang on, 8, 16, 32. So Lucky I'm better at acupuncture than I'm at maths. Anyway, so anyway, at a certain point, your Jing is kind of limited. Okay, so most people you're going to see in your clinic will have some degree. I mean, you know, hands up who doesn't have some kidney deficiency. It's unusual anyway. It's unusual. If you see lots of 18-year-olds, probably they don't have much kidney deficiency. Anyway, another thing he discovered, Hans Sale, is that that the stress that he put on these various animals is actually, it's a limited thing. They can't go on, as we know for ourselves, they can't go on getting stress. Sooner or later, that's it. Okay? So, to some extent, because we're trying to draw comparisons with Chinese medicine, which is where we are, not in the medical world, that is kind of similar, kind of analogous to Jing, because Jing doesn't last forever. That's it. You've got your Jing from your ancestors, whatever, that's it. When you've used up your Jing, poof, that goes down. So, because Jing is related to kidneys, of course, as we know, we have to question what are the adrenals and what is their part in that. Because this stress can't go on forever, so there's a finite quality to it. So the question is that similar to what we understand as Jing, or is that part of what we understand as Jing? Okay, so that's the first question. Okay, so in terms of the anatomy, which I'm sure many of you are familiar with, but we'll just run through it just to, for those of you who are not. Okay, so the adrenal glands sit on top of the kidneys, which is possibly why when the ancient Chinese were doing their anatomy and slicing people open, which is what they did, and Kiko always says that they used to do it particularly with the enemy, because I mean the Chinese have been fighting for, you know, like 2,500 years non-stop. So if they get the enemy, then why not just cut up the enemy, let's see what he looks like, or she looked, probably he back then, what he looks like on the inside. Okay, so it's quite possible, I mean, if you haven't got a microscope, an adrenal gland just looks like a fatty blob on top of a kidney. You know what I mean? So it's understandable. I mean, you know, they kind of missed other bits as well. They didn't get onto the pituitary, they didn't really get the pancreas. So those endocrine bits are quite difficult to kind of perhaps see just anatomically unless you've really got detailed microscopes, etc., etc. So for whatever reason anyway, the Chinese, the ancient Chinese, who are fabulous, didn't notice the adrenal glands. Okay, so as I said, that's our job to try and work out where they fit within our own understanding of what the ancient Chinese are talking about. So, the adrenal glands are composed of two different parts. As I've mentioned already, the internal part is the medulla, and that's where your adrenaline comes from. Okay, so medically, it's actually really, it's a sympathetic ganglion. A ganglion is like a bunch of nerves, so it's really part of the sympathetic part of the autonomic nervous system. Okay, which you know the autonomic nervous system is your kind of automatic nervous system. Okay, that's the one that does all the functions that you don't think about. Your heart, your breathing, your liver, your kidneys, all of those bits. That's under the control of the autonomic nervous system, of which there are two parts, the sympathetic, the fight or flight, and the parasympathetic, which is what you need to, it's the restorative part. So when you're asleep or when you're digesting food, you want to be in parasympathetic mode. You don't want to be in adrenaline mode. Okay? So that's very important. And that's the internal part. Okay? The cortex is the outer part. We've got a little diagram here as well. Poof. Okay? The cortex is the outer part. That's the medulla on the inside. As I say, it sits on top of the kidneys. Okay? And the cortex is where you get your steroid hormone, cortisol, from. Okay? And that steroid hormone is under the influence of the pituitary gland, and the pituitary gland is under the influence of the hypothalamus, okay, which is all in the brain. Okay? So the hypothalamus is the link between the nervous system and the endocrine system. Okay? So because the medulla is part of the sympathetic nervous system, then again there's a link between the adrenaline, which actually increases cortisol secretion, okay, which we'll come to in a minute, and the endocrine function of the cortex. Okay? So there's a link there which is quite important. Okay? The other thing that's important here, oh, and the hypothalamus, sorry, just to mention, is very important because it's under the influence of a lot of different factors, things like blood pressure, etc., etc. But one of the external factors that the hypothalamus is under the influence of is, again, this word stress, okay? And it was Hans Selye that was the first guy to really coin that phrase of stress. So he didn't mean it quite in the way that we mean it, like, oh, I'm stressed. It's more like stress, any kind of stress on the body. Can be physical stress, mental or emotional, so not just physical. I mean, we tend, because we're not generally speaking, doing a lot of hard physical work, we tend to think of it more as a sort of mental, emotional stress, but it can be a physical stress as well. Okay. The other important thing about the cortex is the cortex secretes aldosterone. Now, I know this is all getting a bit like, and some of you are going, what about acupuncture? But it is important just to understand these things, and this particular style of acupuncture that we do, Kiko style, it's very important to try to understand the medical things because they do exist, whether we like it or not. There is an adrenal gland, there is a pancreas, there is a pituitary gland. These things exist. We can't just, sweep it all under the carpet and go, well, it's all kidneys, because it's not. So we have to try and balance it. So, yeah, just stick with it for a minute. We'll get to the Chinese stuff in a moment. So the cortex secretes aldosterone, and aldosterone acts directly on the kidneys. So there is that link coming through between what we know as the adrenals and the kidneys. Okay? So we'll see that in a moment more clearly. Okay, so there's the interaction between the different parts of the adrenal gland, and there's an interaction with the kidneys, the adrenals acting on the kidneys. So what are those? As we've mentioned, the adrenaline acts on the hypothalamus. And the hypothalamus is the thing that controls the pituitary gland, and the pituitary gland releases hormones which then act on all the different endocrine glands in the body. Okay? So adrenaline increases cortisol. So you may think, well, so what? But we've got two kidneys, and the kidneys have a yin-yang quality to them. Okay, so we know that yin and yang interact, don't we? That's why we've got the sign with the black with the little white dot and the white with the black dot. So it's just very interesting to see that the way there is an interaction between these two things, even though they're quite separate in a sense glands. I mean, they're together, but they're embryologically different. Okay, so they're quite different. They have different functions, and yet they very closely interact together. So that's, in a sense, if we want to stretch a little bit, but not that much, it's a kind of yin-yang interaction. Okay, so that's what we're trying to look for. Okay, so equally well, there's a reaction the other way. So if steroid secretion by the cortisol is blocked, then the medulla, which is the sympathetic part, actually shrinks. So that's very interesting as well. So again, there's an interaction between the two. Okay, so obviously you can't function properly without adrenaline, because you need adrenaline to do stuff. What's wrong is too much adrenaline for too long. Okay, so you need to have that balance. So they are interacting between the two of them. Furthermore, as I mentioned a couple of moments ago, the adrenals are interacting with the kidney by releasing aldosterone. And aldosterone acts on them to increase the uptake of sodium, and the water goes with it. Okay, so it's an antidiuretic. So, as we know, kidneys, what are they? They're water. Okay, what's the taste of the kidneys? Salt. So it's a very interesting connection there. So what you'll find, again, I don't know how long you've been in practice, maybe a long time, but what I found is that the ancient Chinese maybe didn't have all the detail, but they had the big picture spot on. So they knew, obviously, there's something going on with the kidneys and water. Obviously, that's fairly obvious. But somehow they made a connection to salt as well. Okay, so that's very interesting. How are we doing for time? Because we haven't got long. Okay, right, now, okay, so we've got through the medical part, now you can go Chinesey. Okay, so, Ling Shu Chapter 8, and I encourage you all, if you've got time and stuff, a bit of dosh, buy a copy of the Ling Shu, or buy a copy of the, or buy a copy of the Su Wen, and just peruse it. Just have a little rustle through, okay, when you've got time. Okay, Ling Shu Chapter 8, 28, sorry. Now, as for the very first origin of all diseases, they all originate from wind, rain, cold, summer heat, from yin and yang, emotions, joy and anger, from beverage, food, and living conditions, so kind of lifestyle, if you like, from being severely scared and sudden fear. So again, they're saying exactly the same thing again. Okay, so the two characters that they have is Kong and Jing, okay, and they're interesting characters because Kong, this bottom part here, I don't know how many of you know this already, but the bottom part is the heart, which some of you will recognize, okay, and the top part, just so I can never remember which way around it is, top left is a tool for work, and the right-hand side is something knocking or banging. So you get the idea of some kind of tool that's knocking or banging. Oh, sorry. Sorry. And not quite that strongly. There, it's a good thing. But anyway, you know that kind of fear you get, and you feel your heart thwack, 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 thwack. So many people, so it's a really kind of apt description of that fear, that kind of stress, fear. And a lot of people, of course, you're going to see in your clinic are going to have that a lot of the time. That's where you get anxiety, people who can't sleep, panic attacks, all of that group of things are all going to be part of that sort of fear thing. Okay, Jing is also a very interesting character. The top part, without going into too much detail, but the top part is about standing firm. Okay? However, the bottom part is the horse. So the horse is an animal, obviously very strong, but it's very skittish sometimes. You know, I don't know how many of you over the years have seen endless, well, usually young women who have been horse riding and had some very bad accident. Broken collarbone, concussion, tailbones, it's endless. Why? I mean, it's never the horse's fault, of course. The horse people is never the horse's fault. But anyway, because a horse is a very skittish animal. It doesn't take much for a horse to rear up and chuck you off. Okay, so there's this idea, some tension between the ability to stand firm in the face of fear, whatever, but also that idea of skittishness. So the ancient Chinese have got these two different kind of facets of what we call fear. So there's the kind of heart-stopping pounding thing, and also the idea of fright itself, the kind of sudden scared. So just two different aspects of the same thing. Okay, an interesting quote from the Su Wen: when one is in fear, the essence withdraws. Okay, so immediately connection to the kidneys. When it withdraws, the upper burner becomes closed. So maybe they're talking something around about the heart, the restriction of the heart, the fear of the heart. When it is closed, qi turns back. When it turns back, the lower burner becomes distended. So obviously one of the things sometimes people get with fear or low-level anxiety is bowel problems, or obviously if extreme fear, then people will, lose control of a bladder or possibly a bowel as well. So that's an interesting connection there. Hence, the qi does not move. Okay, so it's a very important thing. Fear, in a sense, or fright, is a very important cause of disease. Okay, let's have a look at the next few. Okay, again, lovely quote from the Su Wen: when one is frightened, the heart has nothing to lean on. So there's always a connection, obviously, between fire and water. That's our kind of primordial or basic pairing in the body, the yin-yang pairing, fire and water. When the heart is when one is frightened, then the heart has nothing to lean on. The spirit has nowhere to return. So our heart has to be quiet, for the spirit to be quiet. So again, we're in the realms of panic attacks, palpitations, insomnia, all that group of problems. And one's deliberations have nowhere to settle, hence chi is in disorder. If you haven't already, you're going to see tons of people like that. Okay, tons and tons of people in that kind of, some variety of that. Do you know what I mean? Obviously it's a spectrum, but there's some variety of that continuum. Okay, so interestingly, the character for will, your will, okay, it shows again, you'll probably recognise now the heart underneath, and something firm pushing up from below, above it. So you might think, why haven't they got a bit of a kidney character in there? You have to ask the ancient Chinese. My particular idea is that, of course, your will comes in a sense from your heart. You've got to have the heart for it. You've got to really have the heart for it. But the oomph comes from your kidney. The willpower, in a sense, you've got to be motivated in your heart. You know, like boxers, they often talk about boxers. That boy really has the heart for it. You know, he gets up time and time again. But the ability to get up comes from your kidneys. It's the oomph of your adrenal glands that keeps you going. You know, when you're all really, really tired and you just push through, that's your adrenals. The idea comes from your heart. You think, I really got to do this. But the oomph comes from your kidneys or your adrenal gland. And that level, if we flick back to the beginning, that level here is when this phase goes on, and you push through, and you push through, and you push through, and then it even goes below, and then it even goes further, because each time you push through with your adrenals, the question is, are you using a little bit of your jing each time? I guess you probably are. Do you know what I mean? Maybe a tiny bit, but maybe you can get it back, or at least maintain it if you rest. But that kind of, I'm going to push through and push through and push through. And again, you'll see tons of patients in that category. They've been pushing themselves for years and years and years, one way or the other. Whether it's family life and work, or just work, or whatever, they will have been pushing themselves. And each time, they kind of go, and boom, it goes down. Okay, now I'm on a level 4. Oh, boom, it's gone down again. Oh, boom, it's gone down. So that goes on. Because the kidneys are, of course, a bit like your deposit account, aren't they? Your jing is your deposit account. Your stomach chi is your current account, but it's kind of easy to use up, not too difficult to replace. But once you've used up your current account, then you're into your deposit account. And once you start chipping away at your deposit account, it's pretty difficult to get it back because you're always using your current account. So most of the people I suggest, obviously jokingly, is what they really need is 6 months holiday on a nice little island somewhere. Then that will sort many of their health problems out. They just relax, recuperate, let the parasympathetic recuperate, let their jing settle down, all that kind of stuff. Of course, that's unrealistic for most people. Okay, back we go. Okay, so finally, Ming Men. So Men is a gate. The top here is something coming together or unifying. Left side is the mouth. And the right side is like a scepter or something kind of royal. So it's like the idea of, if you have a mouth with a scepter, it's the idea of something, you have the mandate of heaven to kind of fulfill your life. It's bringing that together. You have the mandate of heaven to fulfill your life or to fulfill your destiny. Okay, so that's obviously all about jing. You know, they're forever saying, if you use up your jing, if you go against the Tao, your end will be swift and sticky. So what you need to do is conserve your jing, conserve your energy, and this character, Ming Men, which is right in the center there, between your kidneys, your moving chi between your kidneys, is vital in this kind of scenario that we're talking about. And we have to, well, let's just read these first and have a quick look at these. Just check the time. Yes, good. Okay, so Nanjing 36, it's like this. The two kidneys are not both kidneys. The one on the left, the one on the left is the kidney, the one on the right is the gate of life. Okay, so you've got this yin and yang pairing. Okay, so again, we could be thinking cortisol is slightly on the yin side because it's calming and anti-inflammatory. Adrenaline is definitely on the yang side because it gets you up and, you know, kicking. Okay. And the gate of life is where the spirit essence lodges, so connection between the essence, your kidneys, and the spirit in the heart, so the fire and water again. And it's a place where the original influences are tied. So that's your Jing. Okay? They always begin, Nanjing always begins like it's like this. Okay. All the 12 conduit vessels are linked with the origin of the vital influences. The origin of the vital influences refers to the root foundation of all the 12 conduits, so the meridians. That is to the moving influences between the kidneys. And this final one here, Su Wen 52, above the diaphragm, the Huang, in the middle there is a mother and a father. This is the important bit. The side of the 7th segment, there is a small heart. Small heart. So what does that mean? The small heart, Kiko's understanding is that the small heart is actually referring to this Mingmen fire. It's a fire quality that is around that area. So to tie these three things together, we've got two kidneys. We've got a water kidney and we've got a fire kidney, which is linked to Mingmen. Okay, so the side of the 7th vertebrae, why 7? Because handily, the Chinese, when they're dividing up the spine, they discount the sacrum and discount the neck. So that leaves you 21 vertebrae. So you divide that into 3, so you get 7 and 7. So beside the 7th vertebra could be here, and the 7th vertebra could be here, because you've got 4 sacrum bones, then 1, 2, 3, so you're at Mingmen. Okay? So that's your 7. So there's a small heart. So it could be at the top, but it could also be down here. Okay? So that small heart can relate to the ministerial fire, for those of you who are 5-element people, okay, like your 5 elements. It's also connected to Mingmen. So all of these, we can see that there's different aspects of the kidneys, which you obviously know about, and some of those we can ascribe to the adrenal glands, okay, which is important to think about anyway. Okay, so can we equate the adrenal glands exactly to the kidneys? Exactly to the Chinese concept of the kidneys? Not exactly. Okay, it'd be handy if we could, but unfortunately we can't. But the idea that I'm trying to give you is that there is a lot of similarity, a lot of crossover, and the adrenals have a very important part to play in the kidneys, as we've seen through aldosterone, etc. And this idea that there's two different aspects of the kidneys, so there's a kind of more yin, watery aspect on the left and a more fiery yang aspect on the right, is also perhaps something to do with the idea of a water kidney and Mingmen. Okay? Is that making some sense? I hope so, yeah. It's just a slightly different approach, just to think about how we can understand what we know medically and anatomically is there with what we also know is there as acupuncturists. Okay? Try and get to the bottom of that. Any questions?
I don't know how relevant it is, but it says somewhere in the classics that the will is the will that cannot be willed. I've never really quite understood that. I'm just wondering if it's because you have to have the heart as well.
Yeah, I'm not familiar with that quote, to be honest, but I mean, the ancient Chinese, they don't just stick a character in for no reason kind of thing. Do you know what I mean? It's not like a random, oh, well, what the hell, bung a heart in there, you know, because you'd think, you'd think they'd have some kidney character in there, wouldn't you? But they don't. So, yeah, that would be, yeah, you've got to have the heart for it, you know. That's what kind of, but it's the oomph comes from your kidney. So that's one of the, you know, the genius of Chinese medicine is that they combine those two aspects together, and we have to kind of figure it out. You know, why did they put a heart in there? Why didn't they put a bit of kidney in there with a bit of fire or something for Mingmen? But they didn't. They put the heart in there, which is, and something up and pushing up. So that's important to do that. So yeah, I would think that would be somewhere in that area. Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, long-term steroids will actually, suppress the immune system, etc., etc. Absolutely, yeah, very much so.
Are they making more cortisol? Or
Well, the steroids will be replacing the cortisol,
so your
yes.
body stops making its own.
Absolutely, yeah. But because it's also an artificially high level, then that causes other problems in the body.
Yeah,
Yeah,
right.
and because it's a continual dose, do you know what I mean? The adrenal levels should kind of come and go. It shouldn't be like a constant kind of dose, because then that's very difficult, and the body has to detox from that. Sorry.
So it will affect in a similar way, won't it?
Definitely, yeah, absolutely, yeah. Good. Okay. Right. If you're all good with that, then let's just have before the break. Let's just have a look. Let's just have a look at the etiology. So now we're getting into the realms of the practical side of this style of acupuncture, which is, when someone comes into your clinic, what are you going to do? Someone comes in and says, "Oh, hello, my name's Mr. Smith, Mrs. Smith. I've been diagnosed as adrenal wipeout or adrenal exhaustion, whatever they want to say." So this is the kind of thing that will cause it, and there's kind of different groups in here. So we'll just gently run through those to give you an idea of what we're talking about. Okay, so obviously it's not only limited to these things. You may find other reasons, but this is kind of like a sort of, a standard set that you can kind of work with, sort of thing. And again, these will all be on your sheets. Okay, so as we've talked about already, lifestyle, so overwork, obviously. Poor or insufficient sleep is a big one. And again, that'll come into the signs, symptoms and indications, which we'll do after the break. So insufficient sleep, obviously anything that's going to directly affect the kidneys or the adrenals, as that lady was talking about at the back, like steroid medication, etc. But excessive drink, drugs, etc., etc. Obviously excess salt or inappropriate water intake. So, we should all be hydrated, but do we need to everybody drink 2 litres a day in winter, in a cold, damp climate? I don't know. I would suggest we need to think about that. A lot of that stuff comes from California, where it's like, 25 degrees all year round. If you're living in Scarborough, you know what I mean? And, you're drinking like, 2 litres of water a day and you're sitting at a desk. I don't know. Anyway, and external cold obviously will affect the kidneys, although sometimes the classics say dryness affects the kidneys, sometimes cold. So that's where the hydration comes in. For men, unfortunately, excessive sexual activity will drain the kidneys. Okay, and also I think, for me personally, my clinical observation is there's a lot of what I would call insidious kind of fear, anxiety, hovering. Do you know what I mean? It's quite, it depends where you live, but, I live in London, so there's a kind of unease, do you know what I mean? And there's a general unease around, which affects a lot of people. As we said, these stressor factors depend on your own resilience. If you're very strong, then you don't feel it. If you're slightly tired, weak, whatever, then you will start to feel more things. So there is a very insidious level of fear, anxiety, knocking around, be it, there's terrorists out there, or the world's terribly polluted, or, Trump, or whatever else. Do you know what I mean? There's kind of various anxieties, and people are quite stressed about that stuff. I mean, it does affect them, and it's that kind of drip, drip, drip thing. Do you know what I mean? So if we go back to the beginning, this gives you the idea that it's just kind of one whoosh of stress. And it can be that, but there's many times when we're just in this low level kind of anxiety, stress, is my house going to be burgled? There's loads of stuff. And I think the modern world, particularly I would suggest as well with the electropollution, mobile phones, all the stuff that we're doing, I mean, that's a vibration. So the vibration is going to affect your energy, really, sooner or later. Again, depends on your own strength, your own resilience to these sort of things, but it's going to affect your energy. So those are kind of 2 things that I think the modern world perhaps is also kind of guilty of, in a sense, that we could add on there, this sort of low level anxiety, insidious kind of drip, 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 drip. You know, I mean, you only got to listen to the news and, you know what I mean? Kind of like, yeah. So anyway, so chronic tiredness, exhaustion, stress we've talked about. Again, the insidious stress creeping in. You know, sometimes it can be a relationship, sometimes it can be work. You know, just, you know, so just be aware of that, and you'll see lots of people in your clinic like that. Fear or shock, we've mentioned, and Kiko always says that particularly life-threatening trauma, and particularly then if you have 2 or 3 big shocks in quick succession, then that really clouts the adrenals. Okay, so that's something to, you know, when you're doing your case histories, that's something to look out for. Yeah, you may find that people, you know, sometimes, as you know, I'm sure, when you sit, you think, how's this person even alive? You know, the stuff they've been through, it's like, wow. You know, extraordinary amounts of stress or physical stuff. Anyway, so keep an eye on that. Chronic inflammation. So we're going from sort of purely more adrenaline stuff into more what we might think about is kind of kidneys with things like ovaries. For us, the ovaries belong to kidneys. Okay, so if you hear ovaries, tubal ligation, ovarian cysts, whatever, one of the things we think about is kidneys. Okay, so we're going to see some kind of treatment for that as well. Any hormonal imbalance, so obviously the endocrine system is very much like a web. So if you pull one bit of it, the other bit will vibrate. It's very much like a web that has no weaver. It's like a very, do you know what I mean? Kind of, yeah. Okay. Surgical operations, again, you know, some people have general anaesthetic. Huge operations doesn't really stress them. Other people, you know, they have a bunion operation, it's incredibly stressful. So who's to say how stress affects the individual person? There's a lot of different factors involved, okay? Obviously, your gene that we've talked about a lot will be partly your genetic inheritance, your genetic luck, your fortune, your good fortune, and as the lady at the back there, steroid hormones. And Kiko also mentions antidepressants or strong painkillers. Long term will affect the adrenal gland. Okay. Well, to some extent, yeah, and the liver, of course, yeah. But yeah, particularly these ones will particularly affect this kind of adrenal kidney pattern. Yeah.
And for women, will it be still two children close together?
It can be. It can be. That's often more a blood thing as well. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, if you literally have like 6 kids in 7 years, then yeah, that will be a gene thing as well. But I think that's also not just to do with the kind of loss of gene. It's also to do with the fact that, quite frankly, you're going to be up 7 nights a week. Yeah. So it's a sort of different aspect of losing the kind of the gene and the tiredness and all of that. But yeah, definitely, yeah. Anything that's, you know, if you like, it's not work, but kind of that will do it too. Yeah. Yeah, but women are, you know, but definitely for men, excess sexual activity, that's what the Chinese always. No, you can go crazy. Yeah. Well, that's what the Chinese have been saying all along, haven't they? Knock your sock, knock your boots. What do they say? Knock your, no, you can't say frilly boots. What am I looking for? Anyway. Right, fine. Okay, so, right, it's 1:45, so go and have a cup of tea, and we're starting again in 15 minutes? 15 minutes, okay? So we're going to do a demonstration and the rest of the stuff.